The sun burned hot over the dusty town, beating down on wooden porches and rickety signs that creaked in the wind. I held the reins tight, trying to steady my horse as we approached the square. Every step felt heavier than the last. The townsfolk had gathered like vultures, murmuring and pointing. I could feel their eyes, sharp as arrows, cutting through the heat and dust. My hands shook inside my gloves, but I told myself to breathe. I had been married at 19. Not by choice, no. My father had made the arrangements, trading me for some promise I could never understand. And yet here I was, standing at the center of the square, waiting for a man I barely knew, a man everyone whispered about with equal parts fear and awe. He stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes shaded under a wide-brimmed hat. His face was unreadable, like carved wood. I couldn't tell if he felt anything at all. "Don't cry," I muttered to myself. The wind carried my words away, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The clatter of horse hooves echoed in the silence between murmurs. A few children peeked from behind barrels. Even the dogs seemed to sense the tension. Then the preacher spoke, and my stomach knotted. The words felt like chains, wrapping tighter with every syllable. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering in my chest. Beside me, he offered no hand, no comfort, just a quiet, still presence. And then I saw it, the small, wrapped bundle beside him. The wedding gift, everyone had whispered. Curiosity twisted with fear in my chest. I wanted to look, to see what this man had brought, but I didn't dare move. The wind stirred again, kicking up dust into my eyes. I blinked through it, feeling the first tremor of something I couldn't name. Hope? Suspicion? The townsfolk leaned forward, waiting, whispering, and I realized this wasn't just a wedding. This was a reckoning. The gift would change everything. "Step forward," the preacher said. I did. My horse pawed at the dirt. Hooves clattered, dust rose, and I swallowed my fear. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew this day would mark the start of something I could never undo. The cabin creaked under the weight of the wind as we pushed the door open. I stepped inside, boots scraping the rough wooden floor. The smell of dry pine and smoke hit me, and for a moment I thought it might be a sanctuary. But the shadows clung to the corners, and I knew I wasn't safe. Not yet. He followed silently behind me, his heavy coat brushing against the doorway. His eyes were calm, unreadable, like a river frozen in winter. I didn't trust that calm. Not yet. "I'll light a fire," he said, his voice low, steady. I nodded, forcing my hands to stop shaking. He placed logs carefully in the hearth, striking flint until sparks danced over the wood. The flames came alive, flickering against the walls, casting long, jittery shadows. I stayed near the far wall, my eyes flicking to every corner. Every shadow seemed a threat. Every crack in the floorboards sounded louder than it was. I wondered if I'd ever feel safe under his roof, or if I'd always be a prisoner behind these four walls. He handed me a cup of water, warm in my cold fingers. I stared at it. The gesture was simple, almost kind, but I recoiled, telling myself it didn't erase the past, the forced marriage, the whispers of the town. "Here," he said again, his voice soft but insistent. I took it, lips dry and trembling. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no malice there, just quiet, steady patience. I didn't know whether to be relieved or suspicious. The wind rattled the window panes, snow, or was it dust from the trail, settling against the glass? I heard him moving around the cabin, checking the door, stacking more firewood, humming a tune I couldn't place. He was preparing a world I wasn't sure I wanted to live in. My chest tightened. I hated him for what I'd been forced into, yet I couldn't deny the faintest thread of safety his presence offered. I sank onto a chair, staring into the fire, trying to sort fear from faint hope. That night, the cabin felt like both a cage and a shelter. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me I was trapped, but every flicker of the firelight reminded me I might survive. He didn't speak much, just moved with quiet purpose. And I watched him, uncertain if I was meant to fear him, or to learn that trust, however fragile, might grow in the wilderness after all. The morning sun had just spilled over the ridge, brushing the cabin walls with gold, when I noticed him moving quietly outside. The roof had a broken shingle, And he was up there before I could even sip my coffee. "Can't have the rain sneaking in while I'm sleeping," he said, brushing the dust from his hands. I stared, skeptical. A man who could marry me off like some prize doesn't climb roofs for kindness. Yet, there he was, steady as the wind through the pines. Later, he brought in a basket of fresh bread, still warm from the hearth. I couldn't hide my surprise. "Thought you'd like something to start your day," he said, eyes averted. I sat on the bench, wrapping my hands around the crust, tasting warmth I hadn't expected. Why are you helping me?" I asked softly. He shrugged. "You're here. Might as well make it livable." No grand words. No explanations. Just steady hands and quiet care. That was his kind. And somehow, it scared me more than his silence. I remembered my mother's stern voice, the cold determination that had pushed me into this. 19, married against my will. Yet here I was, sitting with a man I didn't know. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and dust, yet it was a haven compared to the fear in my chest. I let my thoughts wander, and images of my family's decision flashed, their hands pressing me toward a life I didn't choose. The anger burned hot, but curiosity flickered. Could he be different? Could he see me, not the arrangement? By noon, we were working side by side. I carried buckets of water from the stream, while he repaired the fence along the pasture. I stumbled once, mud sucking at my boots, and he caught my elbow without a word. "Careful," he muttered. And just like that, the walls I'd built around my mistrust began to crack. His hands, rough from labor, were steady, his movements deliberate, measured. "I've had worse winters than this," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But they taught me to watch, to plan, to protect." I glanced at him, realizing there were stories behind the stoic face, layers I had no clue about. That evening, as the wind whistled against the cabin, we sat by the hearth. I shared small pieces of my past, bitter fragments of family and fear. He nodded, never interrupting, letting me speak my truths aloud. Then, almost casually, he spoke of losses, a brother taken by illness, a ranch burned, friends who vanished. "We carry what the world leaves behind," he said quietly. His voice held no pity, only understanding. And in that moment, I began to see him. Not the man who forced me into a marriage, but someone capable of quiet courage. The fire crackled. Shadows danced across his face. He handed me a small, worn notebook. "Planning ahead," he said, lips twitching into something like a smile. My heart skipped. That wedding gift, the one everyone whispered about, wasn't just property or coins. It was patience. It was protection. And for the first time, I wondered if this marriage might not be a trap, but a beginning. The wind rattled the cabin's shutters, like a warning drum. I watched from the window, my hands tightening around the edge of the wooden sill. Outside, dust swirled over the prairie, masking the shapes of riders approaching from the ridge. I didn't need to see them clearly to know trouble had arrived. The townsfolk had their eyes on me. Always had. But today, their whispers felt sharper, heavier, almost like daggers aimed at my chest. "She shouldn't be here," one voice said, thin and trembling. "Didn't her family warn you?" Another muttered about the groom, questioning if I could even protect her. I clenched my jaw. Their murmurs didn't matter much to me, not really. But I knew they carried power. Their judgment, their gossip, could make life unbearable out here. Then he appeared. A tall man, boots scraping the ground, hat shadowing his face, eyes sharp as a hawk. I recognized him immediately. A land grabber from the next valley, greedy and ruthless. His horse snorted, stomping the dirt as if even it knew the threat its rider brought. My heart skipped a beat, not with fear, but with calculation. He wanted to test me, to see if I'd flinch. I stepped outside, voice calm but steady. "Evening, Colton. What brings you this far?" My words were measured, careful. Any sign of panic could be used against me. The wind carried his reply, sharp and mocking. "Just checking in. Wondered if the new bride of yours is settling in, or regretting it already." A subtle sign told me something was wrong. A fence post broken near the barn, fresh tracks leading toward the cabin, and the scent of smoke faint in the air. Someone had been here before Colton arrived, leaving a warning. My eyes flicked to her. She clutched the doorframe, pale, fear etched into her young face. I moved closer, keeping my voice low. Don't look at them. Keep your head down. I've got this. She nodded, trembling, but I saw the first spark of trust. Even as the wind whistled, carrying dust and distant hooves, I made a silent vow. No one would threaten her on my watch. Not today. Not ever. I turned back to Colton, square in my shoulders. If you're here for trouble, leave it on the prairie. Otherwise, we talk. He smirked, tipping his hat, but I saw the tension in his fingers tighten around the reins. He was testing me. I wasn't about to flinch. I woke before dawn, the chill of the prairie biting at my skin. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft stamping of the horses outside. He was already moving, silent, precise, checking the locks, peering out windows. I watched him, heart hammering. I didn't trust the town yet. Not fully. But here, in the stillness of our cabin, he moved like a man who had survived everything the West could throw at him. Help me with this, he said, holding out a rifle. His hands were steady, but there was tension in his shoulders. I took it, fumbling with the strap. You know how to clean it? He asked. I shook my head. Then I'll show you. The cold metal bit my fingers as he guided me. I hated how much I needed him, and yet I didn't. I wanted to prove I could be more than a frightened girl. Together, we stripped the rifle, wiped the grime, oiled the barrel. My hand stung from the effort. He glanced at me. Not bad. Outside, the wind carried a low whistle through the trees. Horses pawed the frozen ground, their breath steaming in the early light. I fed them quietly, my movements automatic. He nailed boards over the cabin windows, each thud echoing in my chest like a heartbeat. The sounds of preparation felt sacred, like we were building something bigger than just a home. We were building trust. You're fast with your hands, he said, tying a knot I hadn't known I could make. I smiled despite myself. For the first time, I felt like we were partners, not prisoner and captor. At midday we paused. I handed him a piece of bread, and he poured water from the well. We ate in silence, the kind that didn't need words. The cabin smelled of smoke, pine, and oil. Outside, a shadow passed the tree-line. My stomach tightened. He noticed. Eyes open, he said. And we went back to our work, sharpening tools, checking traps, hanging lanterns from nails. Every task was a small act of survival. Every glance at each other a silent promise. By evening, I felt it, the subtle shift. Fear still lingered, but so did something new. A tentative trust. We had prepared for the storm. Not just the weather, but the storm that might come from men who thought fear gave them power. I wiped the sweat and grime from my brow, my hands raw from rope and gun oil. He looked at me, his eyes steady. Whatever comes, we face it together. I nodded. That moment, small and unspoken, felt like a gift. The first sound of hoofbeats cut through the night, like a warning bell. I pressed my back to the cabin wall, feeling the cold timber bite against my shoulders. Outside, shadows moved fast, jagged shapes against the flickering lamplight. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat matching the thundering of hooves. Get ready, I whispered to her, keeping my voice low but firm. She nodded, eyes wide but steady. The livestock were penned tightly, ropes taut, but the wind carried their fear like whispers. I loaded my rifle with practiced hands, each click loud in the tense silence. Then came the shouting. Step out, and we'll burn it all, a gruff voice barked. The antagonist had arrived, flanked by his men, lanterns swinging and gun barrels gleaming. Dust rose around their boots, filling the yard with a choking haze. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to breathe slow. Calm was my weapon as much as any gun. Stay behind me, I said. She pressed against the wall, trembling. I could feel her resolve simmering beneath the fear. The first shot rang out, splintering wood as the antagonist's men tried to breach the outer fence. Sparks danced along the planks. I returned fire, careful, precise, each shot keeping them at bay. The night smelled of gunpowder, sweat, and dust. She didn't flinch. Not this time. The west pasture. Now, she shouted. My head snapped toward her, realizing she had spotted a loose panel in the fence I hadn't noticed. Her voice was steady, commanding even, and I saw the fire in her eyes. Together, we drove the livestock into the inner pens, locking them safely away. That small act of courage, her courage, hit me harder than any bullet. The antagonist cursed, advancing. Horses stampeded in panic, hooves drumming like war drums. I ducked behind a timber post, calculating angles. Smoke curled around the cabin roof as lanterns wavered, their light catching on sweat-streaked faces. I flicked my rifle upward, hitting a trigger point I knew would slow their advance. A rope snapped. A man fell with a grunt, tangling in a bundle of hay. The chaos was complete. She moved beside me, handing me extra cartridges. "Here, don't stop," she said. Her hands were steady despite trembling arms. My chest swelled, not with pride, exactly, but with a fierce gratitude. This girl I'd married under strange circumstances. She was no longer a frightened child. She was a partner in survival, a force I could rely on. Gunfire cracked through the night again. I peeked over the cabin wall, catching the glint of an antagonist's knife swinging, and I tackled him to the ground. Shouts rose. Horses reared. Lanterns toppled. Sparks flew like fireflies in the dark, dust swirling like a ghostly storm. I heard her scream, a mix of fear and command, and my pulse raced faster. She had rallied the remaining townsfolk, guiding them to safety and giving them courage to stand behind us. By now, the fight was a blur of motion, splintered wood, flying dust, smoke drifting lazily into the moonlit sky. I could see the antagonists faltering, their bravado cracking under the combined pressure of townsfolk, the bride, and me. Every decision, every movement mattered. One false step, one missed shot, and we would have lost everything. And then it ended. The antagonist's men scattered into the night, horses thundering off into the darkness. The cabin trembled, dust settling like snow. I sank against the wall, rifle heavy in my hands, and she collapsed beside me. Her face, illuminated by the last flickers of lantern light, was streaked with sweat and tears, but her eyes burned with triumph. "We did it," I said, voice hoarse. She laughed, a shaky sound, but genuine. "We survived," she whispered, and in that moment, the fear that had clung to her since our wedding melted away. We had faced the storm together, blood, dust, and fire, and emerged as partners. The villagers would talk about this night for years, but the truth was simple. Trust forged in terror was stronger than any gun or threat. I looked around the yard. Ropes snapped, lanterns dim, the wind carrying the scent of smoke and rain. She reached for my hand, gripping tightly, a silent promise passing between us. I finally understood. The true gift of that forced marriage wasn't gold or land. It was the bond we had forged under fire. What would you have done if you were in our shoes? Could you find courage when fear ran deep in your veins? The night had tested us, reshaped us, and left no room for doubt. Together, we were unstoppable, and the horizon held no shadows we couldn't face. The dust finally settled. Smoke curled from the cabin chimney, drifting over scorched earth and broken fence posts. I sank onto the wooden porch, my hands still shaking from the fight, and I could feel her eyes on me. She stood tall, though the dust clung to her hair and smudged her cheeks. For the first time that day, I noticed the subtle shift in her stance. Fear softened, replaced by something I hadn't expected, respect. You did it," she said, voice low, almost disbelief. I thought we were done for." I wiped my hands on my coat. "Ain't over till the last shot's fired," I muttered. Then I looked at her properly. "But we made it. Together." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of pine and scorched earth. I reached behind the cabin wall and opened a crate I had hidden weeks ago. Inside, stacked neatly, were the tools and gifts I'd brought to this marriage: a set of sturdy plows, sacks of seed, a few head of strong horses, and a small box of personal keepsakes. Her eyes widened. "All this for me?" "For us," I said. "I figured a man can marry a woman without trying to own her. Thought we could build something that lasts. On our land. On our terms." She stepped closer, brushing dust from her skirts, and allowed a small, cautious smile. "I didn't expect any of this," she admitted. Her voice was softer now, filled with awe and a trace of warmth. "I thought I'd be trapped here forever. But maybe this is different. I handed her the reins of one of the horses. You decide, girl. You decide if this land, these animals, this life, are yours as much as mine. For the first time, I saw her eyes not just as fear-stricken, but as someone willing to trust. We worked together, repairing the cabin roof, mending the fence, and tending to the wounded horse from the fight. Each hammer strike, each rope tightened, each seed planted felt like a promise, not of ownership, but of partnership. By the time the sun began to rise over the mountains, casting gold across the prairie, the landscape seemed alive with possibility. The dust from the battle swirled up and then dissipated into the wind, leaving the earth clean, the air fresh. Horses grazed peacefully near the fence line. Birds called from the treetops. The cabin looked whole again, bathed in dawn's light. You know, she said quietly as we watched, I think I can stay here. I nodded, my throat tight. Then stay. Build with me. Fight with me. Whatever comes, we face it together. In that moment, the town beyond the hills began to murmur differently. Those who had watched us feared, gossiped, or judged now saw strength, and perhaps, in some corner of their hearts, respect. We weren't just a couple bound by marriage. We were survivors. We were a family. We chose ourselves. I glanced at her again, and for the first time, I felt that fear, that unease, had melted completely. A new life stretched before us, hard, uncertain, but ours. And in the quiet light of dawn, with wind carrying away the last traces of dust and smoke, I knew that this was only the beginning. I watched the first light of dawn stretch over the prairie, smoke curling gently from our cabin chimney. The world felt quiet, but not empty. I thought of the choices that brought us here, the fear I carried, the trust one had to learn, the courage that arrived when I least expected it. Life on the frontier was harsh, often cruel, but it had a way of teaching you who you could truly rely on. I learned that bravery was sometimes quiet, found in small acts of kindness, in holding steady when the wind tore through the dust, and in protecting those who could not protect themselves. What would you have done if faced with the same trials? Remember the ones who carried truth and courage through impossible odds. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.